Chapter 1251. When Naomi heard that, her tears dropped like pearls from a broken necklace. She clasped her heart in pain, turned around, and ran without looking back. Francisco saw her disappear from the door, and his heart suddenly ached. The feelings that he was suppressing made his face twitch. Samantha couldn't hold it in any longer, so she walked into the room. "How could you do that?" He was surprised. "Mom." "Samantha." Kennedy tried to stop her, but it was too late. Francisco's face turned after the slap, but he kept quiet. Samantha took a deep breath and spoke when she calmed down. "I think you have feelings for the girl, and sending her away hurts you. What made you do that? Why can't you deal with the issue together?" He looked down and replied after a moment, "Mom, let me deal with it." "Let you deal with it? Do you think I'd care if you weren't my son?" "All right, I'll let you be." Samantha pointed at him. "You did this to yourself. Now live with it." She was worried about her son, but after seeing what happened, she didn't feel like getting involved with her useless son. Kennedy helplessly looked at Francisco, then turned around and followed her. The room was back to being quiet. Francisco put his hand to his forehead and mumbled, "I'm sorry." Naomi sat at the bus stop sadly and stared at the people and cars passing by. Her heart felt empty as if there was a hole in the middle. "Let's just break up." That sentence stabbed her in her heart and took that part of her heart away. It would never be whole anymore. Naomi didn't understand why relationships were so complicated. If he didn't like her, why had he kissed her? Unfortunately, she would never get an answer to all those questions. Everything had come to an end. A car stopped in front of her, and the window slowly rolled down. Naomi was startled. The man who was driving was none other than Jackie Clifford. After getting into the car, Jackie drove away. He asked, "Are you in trouble?" Naomi lowered her head. "Not really." She was just heartbroken. Jackie looked at her and smiled. "Are you seeing someone?" She paused, but didn't reply. He quietly said, "There's someone I can't let go of either, so I understand how you feel." Naomi looked at him. "You're seeing someone?" "Yes," he slowly said, "but we didn't get together and never will." "Why?" She didn't understand. "Aren't you both in love? Why can't you be together?" Jackie frowned. "Not all lovers can end up together." He smiled after saying that. There are a lot of people who love each other but can't be together, and these lost loves will become regrets that can only be remembered. But not ending up together doesn't mean that it never existed. Some people felt sad because they were never together, but some felt sad because they were meant to be together but broke up instead. I'm the former. Naomi looked out the window. What about Francisco and her? Were they the latter? Jackie parked outside the Topaz residence. Naomi got out and turned to look at him. "Thanks for the ride." Jackie stood next to his car and smiled. "Don't mention it." Chapter 1252. Naomi nodded. "I'm headin' then. Drive safe." Jackie watched her walk in before driving away. Naomi walked into the living room. Mrs. Irving had prepared dinner and smiled when she saw her. "It's time for dinner, ma'am." "I'm not hungry." "You go ahead." Naomi walked up the stairs without looking back. Mrs. Irving put the food on the table and looked at her worriedly. After Anthony arrived home, Mrs. Irving told him about what had happened because she was worried. Anthony took off his coat and handed it to her. "I'll go take a look." He went to Naomi's room, knocked on the door, opened the door, and saw Naomi sitting in front of her desk, going through a photo album. "Naomi, why aren't you having dinner?" Naomi shook her head. "I'm not hungry yet, don't feel like eating." Seeing how sad his daughter was, he could guess what had happened. He walked to her, sat down, and said, "Nellie, all that I have done is for your own good." Naomi was surprised. Anthony looked down. "I know you like Francisco a lot, but he's not good for you." I don't want to gamble off your happiness, because I don't want to see you end up like me. Naomi was stunned. She saw the sadness in her father's eyes, and understood that her father really was just concerned about her. After a moment of silence, she slowly said, "Dad, when Mom left you, you must have been really sad too." Anthony chuckled. "I was for a while, but I'm glad I had you. You're the reason I carried on." Naomi lowered her head. "Dad, I'm sorry." Anthony raised his hand and touched her head. "There's no need to apologize to me." Naomi started crying, and Anthony hugged her to console her. "Everything will get better." After a few days, Maisie made some coffee, walked to her desk, and sat down. Someone knocked on the door. She picked up her coffee and took a sip. "Come in." Lucy and Naomi walked in. "Ms. Vanderbilt, you asked to see us?" Maisie put down her cup and looked up. "Yes, I plan to send you to manage the stores. What do you think?" Lucy walked to the desk. "Do we go together?" Maisie nodded. "Yes, Naomi is familiar with jewelry making now, and you have experience with management. I trust you the most after Uncle Kennedy, so I trust it won't be a problem?" Lucy smiled and answered, "It's fine by me, but Naomi." She turned to look at her. Maisie looked too. Naomi smiled and nodded. "That's fine." Maisie asked Naomi to stay. Naomi looked at her curiously. "What can I do for you, Ms. Vanderbilt?" Maisie crossed her fingers and placed them under her chin. "I heard that you're not being yourself lately. Did something happen?" Naomi paused and looked down. "Nothing, I'll get back on my feet as soon as possible." Maisie looked at Naomi. "Is it about Francisco?" Naomi opened her mouth but didn't say anything, and Maisie didn't push. "I don't know what happened, but listen to your heart. No matter what you end up choosing, pick one that you won't regret in the future." Kennedy had recounted everything, so Maisie knew what had happened. It wouldn't be appropriate for her to intervene no matter what issues they were facing, but she could nudge them in the right direction. Naomi looked at her. "Ms. Vanderbilt, if you missed your chance to be with Mr. Goldman, would you have regretted it?" Chapter 1253. Maisie was in deep thought for a long time. "Yes, but I could feel his love for me, so I wouldn't have let it become a regret." Naomi looked down and gave a sad smile. When people who loved each other couldn't be together, it was just because they didn't love each other enough. Why would two people who loved each other a lot let it turn into regret? She liked Francisco, but did he feel the same? Since he had given up so easily, maybe he just wasn't that into her. The week after that, Naomi and Lucy worked at the store, and she slowly recovered. Naomi sat in her new office and was doing some design work when a colleague appeared outside her door. "Naomi, a handsome man is asking for you outside." Naomi's heart skipped a beat. She stood up and walked out to the corridor. When she got there and saw the person waiting for her, there was Jackie. Disappointment flashed across her eyes, but she recovered quickly. She felt pathetic for her own naivety as she walked toward him. "Mr. Clifford, why are you here?" Jackie turned to face her. "I'm sorry for interrupting. You didn't." Naomi smiled. "But how did you know that I'm at the store?" "Your dad told me." Naomi paused. "My dad told you?" He nodded and looked at her. "It's a little embarrassing. My grandfather wants me to get a girlfriend while I'm at Bassburg, but the girls I know are married or working overseas." Naomi paused. "Are you trying to?" Jackie smiled. "Don't worry. I don't insist. It just happens that I know you, so I'd like to ask for your help." She was curious. "How do you want me to help?" Jackie put his hand under his chin. "We could pretend to be dating, so my grandfather stops worrying. He gave me an order, but I don't want to end up in an arranged marriage with a woman I don't know." Naomi wouldn't want to be arranged to marry someone she didn't know either. She looked down. "But how long could we keep up the act?" Jackie smiled and said, Don't worry about that. Since I'll be here for a long time, I might meet someone that I like, and when that happens, you won't need to play along anymore. Naomi agreed, even though she wasn't sure why. It was probably because she no longer had a relationship with Francisco, so even if she agreed to this fake relationship, he wouldn't mind. After Jackie left, he got a call from Maisie right when he got to his car. "How can I help you, old friend?" Maisie teased him. "Is it too embarrassing to call me your cousin?" He chuckled. "I'm sorry, but I just can't do it." "Shoot." She was direct. "Let's meet." Maisie waited in the cafe, and Jackie showed up not too long after that. He walked to the seat across from her and sat down. "What is so important you have to tell me in person? Aren't you afraid that your husband will get jealous?" Maisie crossed her arms and leaned back. "I'm meeting you openly, so there's no point for him to be jealous." "You went to see Naomi?" Jackie raised his eyebrows. "There's a spy in the store?" Maisie chuckled. "Have you fallen for her?" "No." Jackie sat up straight and put his hand under his chin. "I just don't want to keep getting set up to meet a different woman every time I have dinner." Their intentions were too obvious, and Ms. Topaz is the opposite. "It turns out that I need someone to help keep those pesky women away from me." Chapter 1254. Maisie frowned. "So you picked her?" The server brought over a cup of coffee, and Jackie moved it next to his hand. "Her father wanted to matchmake us, so it would be normal for me to pick her." Maisie rubbed her temples. "So, you're not really interested in her?" "She isn't interested in me either. I don't like to make people do things." She smiled. "Oh, you didn't make anyone do anything at the hotel." Jackie was rendered speechless. Maisie put her hand under her chin. "I feel better hearing you say that. I need your help with something too." The news about Naomi and Jackie dating spread quickly, and it got to Anthony too. Even he was shocked. Naomi was having dinner at the table when he rushed home and looked up. "You're back." "I just finished work." Anthony put down his briefcase, pulled up a chair at the table, and suddenly asked, "Nellie, how did you and Mr. Clifford?" Naomi smiled. "Didn't you wish that I would end up with him?" Even though she was just pretending to date Jackie, she couldn't tell her father the truth. Anthony paused. He did hope that his daughter would end up with Jackie, but that was too soon. He didn't believe that it was that simple. He looked at Naomi. "Nellie, do you like him?" Naomi paused, and after a while, she looked at him. "Dad, would you let me marry a man that I don't have feelings for?" Anthony choked and looked down. "No way. Of course I want you to marry someone you love. But the man that I like doesn't feel the same way for me anymore, so it doesn't matter who I end up with, right?" She smiled sadly, put down her cutlery before she even finished eating, and went upstairs. Anthony froze on the spot and frowned. He didn't know if what he had done was right, but he knew it was for his daughter, and that wasn't wrong. If Francisco wasn't sincere with his daughter, he would do everything to get her away from him. The next day, Naomi let Jackie send her to the office as usual. When she got out of the car, Jackie called out to her. She looked back and saw him walking over. "What is it?" Jackie put the scarf he was holding around her neck, which made her pause. "All right." Jackie tied it up and smiled. "It looks good on you." Naomi knew they were pretending, but the act of putting on a scarf was something a real boyfriend would do, so she was confused. She smiled and said, "Thank you." Jackie waved. "Run along." Naomi nodded, turned around, and entered the office building. After she disappeared into the building, Jackie looked over to a corner. She went into the elevator, but someone suddenly popped up behind her, and before she could react, the doors closed. She struggled to free herself, but paused when she saw the familiar face under the hat. "You." Francisco took off his hat. "Are you in a relationship with Mr. Clifford now?" It sounded like he was interrogating her. Naomi pressed her lips together. She hadn't seen Francisco for a long while and never thought he would show up, but he did. She turned her face away. It doesn't matter to you who I'm with now. He smiled. You've changed. Changed? Naomi's heart ached, and she balled up her fist. You're the one who wanted to break up. We're no longer together, so should I still miss you? Chapter 1255. Francisco didn't answer. She lowered her head, still unable to be as calm as he was. If you have nothing more to say, I'll be on my way. She was going to turn around when Francisco pulled her arm. I have a question. Naomi took a deep breath, but didn't turn around. What? Do you love Jackie? Naomi beamed and didn't say anything. After a moment, she pulled her hand away. It doesn't matter. Francisco turned to look at her. Do you have any feelings for him? Naomi didn't understand why Francisco was asking her about that, so she turned around and looked into his eyes. What does this have to do with you? You don't like me, but I can't be with someone else? She regretted saying that because she saw how sad his eyes were, and it made her think that he was the one who was hurt. After a long pause, he turned his body away. I guess Mr. Topaz was right. The feelings you had for me weren't real. When you meet someone better, you easily fall for him. Naomi froze. What did you say? Francisco put his hat back on and walked down the stairs without looking back. When Naomi snapped back, she went after him. Francisco. She put out her arm and grabbed him. Explain yourself. There's nothing more to say. Francisco pulled his arm out of her grasp and looked at her. You got a new lover once we broke up. Isn't that enough proof? Naomi's heart ached. I didn't. Stop pretending. Francisco raised his voice and pulled down his hat to cover his eyes. Your feelings were shallow. He turned around, but Naomi said behind him, what about you? Did you have feelings for me? Francisco stood at the stairs, but didn't look back. Naomi tried to keep her tears from falling. If you really had feelings for me, you wouldn't have broken up with me. If you didn't want to face all this with me, why should I be the one who's waiting for you? It took a lot of courage for me to get close to you, but you just ignored me. You said that I was doing too much, so now I'm not going to do anything anymore. She wiped her tears away and smiled a forceful smile. I've given up, Francisco. I don't have feelings for you anymore. Even though her heart ached so much that she felt like she was going to die, she decided to give herself some respect and turned around to leave, but her tears just kept falling. She was hugged from behind when she opened the door to walk out and froze. Francisco seemed to be using all his might. Naomi. He buried his head in the back of her head, and her hair tangled up with his shirt's buttons. I'm sorry. Naomi burst into tears in his arms. Francisco tightened his grip. His eyes were deep and sad. I shouldn't have said what I said, and I didn't ignore you, I'm just confused. She didn't reply. Francisco turned her over and wiped the tears off her face. I don't hate you. I'm insecure because I have feelings for you. Naomi blinked, and her wet lashes bunched together. You said that everything was over. Francisco, it's tiring to love you. I can't see through your heart. You break up, apologize whenever you want to, and never care about how I feel. I had to tiptoe around you because I didn't want you to hate me or be a nuisance, because I have feelings for you, and that changed me. She cried in his arms, and every word hit Francisco deep in his heart. Chapter 1256. Francisco trembled, and he hugged her even tighter. It looked like he was using all his strength, but a sense of powerlessness rose from the depths of his heart. A surge of emotion raged in his eyes as he said, Naomi. I don't know how to express my feelings. You're different from those women I wooed before, so I can't treat you like I treated them. He tightened his grip on her shoulders. If I had known this day would come, I would have stayed away from you in the first place. Naomi's eyelashes trembled. She stayed in his arms and did not say anything. Francisco stroked her cheek with his hand and wiped the tears off her face. I don't deserve a good woman like you. He slowly pulled away from Naomi after he finished speaking. Just when he turned around, Naomi hugged him from behind. He was stunned, and his chest rose up and down heavily. Naomi. Just let me hug you for a while. Naomi closed her eyes. She pressed her cheek against his back, feeling the warmth of his body seeping into her for the last time. After a long while, she withdrew her arms and said, I'm satisfied that I know you like me too. His chest heaved up and down heavily. He pulled the door open and went away without turning his head. He dared not to turn his head around, for he did not want her to see the redness beneath his eyes. Several days later. Engagement? Naomi was stunned. She looked at Jackie sitting in front of her in surprise and asked, Are you serious, Mr. Clifford? I thought we were just pretending to be a couple. Why does he want to get engaged? Jackie picked up his coffee cup and took a sip. It's just a fake engagement. He then put the cup on the table and straightened his back. We're just going to go through some formalities. Besides, we can cancel the engagement at any time. Mr. Clifford, are you doing this just to lie to your grandfather? Naomi asked. You can put it that way. Jackie replied with a smile. Don't you want to know what Francisco will do after learning of your engagement? Naomi was stunned. Indeed, Naomi was curious about what Francisco would do when he learned of the engagement between her and Jackie. Would he give them his blessing, or? Do you want to bet? Bet on what? Naomi asked hesitantly. The smile on Jackie's face deepened as he said, Let's bet on whether or not he'll stop us from getting engaged. She lowered her head and clenched her hands tightly. What if he chooses to give us a blessing? Jackie placed his hand on his forehead and pressed on. What do you think? Do you want to bet or what? What about you, Mr. Clifford? Naomi lifted her head to look at him. If he appears, won't you be the one to be abandoned? It doesn't seem fair to you, does it? Jackie was stunned for a moment before letting out a laugh. Well, this is a surprise. I didn't know you would worry about me, Ms. Topaz. He leaned against the back of the chair and continued. You don't have to worry about that at all, Ms. Topaz. After all, it's me who approached you to put up a show in the first place. This charade isn't real. Sooner or later, people will find out. Naomi pressed her lips thin. When are we going to do it? He rested his chin on his hand and suggested, how about the end of this month? Hashtag Naomi Topaz of the Eastwood Enterprise is engaged. Hashtag everyone was stunned when the news came out. After all, she and Jackie had only been in a relationship not more than a month, and they did not expect them to get engaged so soon. Barbara went straight to Soul Jewelry when she saw the news. She pushed the door to the office open and said, Maisie, Naomi is engaged. Maisie lifted her head and replied, Yeah. I know about that. Then why aren't you surprised? Barbara walked up to the desk and put her hands on it. Does this not mean that our effort to match them up has gone to waste? Well, there's nothing we can do about it. Maisie said as she played with the pen around her fingers. The problem is with Francisco. Maybe you're right. He should just be single. Barbara crossed her arms in front of her chest. What's wrong with him? I thought he was very experienced with women. Didn't he have a lot of girlfriends in the past? Chapter 1257. Maybe that's the problem. Maisie looked at Barbara. Mr. Topaz isn't satisfied with Francisco because of his scandalous past. You try and think about it. A playboy who wants to settle down in a relationship. Who can guarantee that he won't go around and tease other women after getting married? Mr. Topaz has only one daughter. She has never fallen in love with any man before, and she's as pure as a blank sheet of paper, so do you think he'll hand his daughter over to Francisco? Barbara was stumped. Aren't they all saying a prodigal who returns is more precious than gold? Maisie chuckled. Yeah, but even Francisco doesn't have confidence in himself that he can give Naomi happiness. He should be serious about his relationship with Naomi. A man with a long love history meets a woman who has never fallen in love with any man before. He wants to cherish the relationship, but he's afraid he doesn't deserve her purity, so he can only let it go. After hearing what Maisie said, Barbara scoffed exasperatedly. Sigh, why must he do that to himself? He could have just followed his heart. Maisie shrugged and continued. If he chooses not to do anything when he learns that Naomi is getting engaged, then they're over. Jackie brought Naomi to pick up her dress. The shopkeeper enthusiastically placed various new dresses in front of Naomi and let her pick. He took his phone and walked up to her. You pick first. I'm going to make a call. She nodded. After Jackie left, she picked a lavender off-shoulder dress and walked to the dressing room. She changed into the dress and looked at herself through the mirror. The dress fit her like a glove, further accentuating her great physique. The lace on the top of her dress echoed with the tulle pattern cut on the side of the skirt, making the dress less plain. Just when Naomi looked at her reflection in a trance, a series of footsteps wafted into her ears. She thought Jackie had returned, and when she opened up the curtain of the dressing room, what met her vision was a familiar figure that was walking away. Her heart skipped a beat, and she picked up the hem of her dress to chase after the figure. Naomi came out to the corridor, but there was no one there. Naomi? Jackie showed up. What's wrong? She shook her head in a daze and turned around to look at him. Nothing. Let's go back inside. Okay. Jackie wrapped his arm around her shoulder, and he glanced in the direction of the stairs when he turned around. Naomi had been rather distracted from the moment she came out of the shopping mall. She was pretty certain that the figure was Francisco, but she did not understand why he refused to see her. Why had he come here if he did not want to see her? Jackie opened the door for her. When she got into the car, Jackie walked over to the driver's seat and drove the car away. Not far away, Francisco, who was sitting in his own car, watched the car as it slowly disappeared from his vision. He looked down at his phone and frowned. Jackie drove Naomi back to her house. She got out of the car and bade him goodbye. After she saw the car leave, she turned around and entered her house. Jackie returned to the hotel and parked his car in the basement car park. No sooner had he gotten out of his car than a car showed up from nowhere and blocked eye in front of him. Jackie looked at Francisco and smiled. You've been following us the whole time. Can I say that you still haven't gotten over her? Francisco closed the door and walked toward Jackie expressionlessly. Do you really love Naomi? He asked. Jackie met his gaze and replied, I don't think that's your business, right, Mr. Boucher? You have a marriage contract with the daughter of the king of casinos in Octavia, Francisco said calmly. Not only is your engagement not cancelled, but you still keep in touch with her privately. Does she or the Byrons know about your engagement? Jackie frowned. You investigated me? Of course, I had to. Francisco looked at him straight in the eyes, his gaze sharp. Are you not worried that Naomi might learn about it? Chapter 1258. What if she knows about it? Jackie asked, stunning Francisco. He looked at Francisco and chuckled. Go ahead and tell her about it. I don't really care. After he finished speaking, he patted Francisco's shoulder and continued. After all, she did it out of her own free will. I didn't force her. Francisco's gaze was cold, and he clenched his fists tightly. I won't let you get away with it. He turned around, went back into his car, and drove away. Jackie watched the car that had gotten further away in his vision and clicked his tongue. It seemed to him that Francisco couldn't hold himself anymore. Guess I still need to give him one last push. The next afternoon, Naomi came to the restaurant. Jackie had already booked the entire restaurant and was waiting for her. She walked to the seat opposite him and sat down. Then, she said, You don't have to spend so much money, Mr. Clifford. It's fine. I don't like getting disturbed. Jackie said as he poured a glass of wine. Do you drink? Naomi was stunned for a moment before replying, I can drink some. Jackie poured a glass for her and said, "Francisco came looking for me yesterday." Naomi's hand froze midair when she took Jackie's glass of wine. After that, she lowered her head and pressed her lips. "Why did he come looking for you?" "Maybe he doesn't feel comfortable with our engagement." Naomi did not say anything. She was certain that the figure in the shopping mall yesterday was Francisco. However, why was he avoiding her? Why did he go look for Jackie if he was avoiding her? The more Naomi thought about it, the angrier she became. "I won't forgive him so soon." Jackie put the glass against his lips and looked at the angered Naomi. A figure popped up in his brain, and he fell deep in thought. When the waitress was serving the dishes, her elbow accidentally knocked over the wine glass on the table. The glass then fell toward Naomi, spilling wine all over her. "Ah. I'm so sorry about that." The waitress was startled. She hurriedly pulled out a tissue paper in an attempt to clean her up. Naomi smiled and replied, "It's okay. I'll do it myself." She took over the tissue paper and began cleaning herself. The restaurant manager came over and scolded the waiter, "What is wrong with you? How could you be so clumsy?" The waitress kept her head low and kept apologizing. The restaurant manager then turned over to Jackie and said with an ingratiating smile, "I'm truly sorry about that, Mr. Clifford. I hope it doesn't affect your dining mood." Jackie picked up a napkin to wipe the corner of his mouth. "It's okay. Please lead Ms. Topaz to the guest room to change her clothes." Hearing what he said, Naomi chimed in hesitantly, "It's fine. I don't think it is necessary for me to change my clothes." Jackie lifted his head to look at her and replied, "No, it isn't fine. I guess you don't want to continue our date with dirty clothes, right?" Naomi was rendered speechless. After the waitress brought her to the room, she came out. The room was warmly decorated. There were large floor-to-ceiling windows with 360 degrees panoramic views of the city and fully automatic curtains. However, what surprised her even more was that the fluffy white bed was sprinkled with rose petals, and even the bathroom was translucent. Naomi was stunned. This room was fine for one person, but wouldn't it be awkward if two people stayed in it? One could see through the bathroom when someone was taking a bath inside. There was no privacy at all, and she wondered who had designed the room. Someone knocked on the door when she was immersed in her thoughts. She opened the door, and the waitress handed a bag of clothes to her. "Ms. Topaz, Mr. Clifford says you should take a bath in the bathroom first before changing into your clothes." All right." Naomi closed the door. Her face was fully written with confusion. She did not know why, but she had a feeling that Jackie was a little bit too well prepared. When Naomi was taking a hot shower in the bathroom, she heard the doorbell. She turned off the shower, quickly grabbed her bathrobe, and wrapped it around her body. "Is it Mr. Clifford?" Chapter 1259. Naomi opened the door, and when she saw the man standing in front of her, she was stunned, and her brain went blank. When Francisco saw her wrapped in a bathrobe and remembered who she was calling just now, his face turned dark. At that moment, Naomi finally came around to her senses. "Mr. Boucher, what are you?" Before she could finish her sentence, Francisco pushed her into the room. He closed the door, and when he saw the rose petals on the bed, a cold glint crossed his eyes as he smiled coldly. "Are you waiting for Jackie?" "What?" asked Naomi. "This is a honeymoon suite, and you even took a shower," said Francisco, his face grim with anger. "Are you going to offer yourself to him?" "This is a honeymoon suite." Naomi was stunned. Before she could come around to her senses, Francisco pinned her to the wall and kissed her. Naomi's eyelashes fluttered. His kiss was fueled with desire, and his action was more vigorous than the last time he kissed her. She put her hands on his chest and pushed him twice, because she was suffocating. Francisco clamped her hands together and deepened the kiss. She felt dizzy and could sense that his breath was becoming hotter with each passing second. He moved his lips away and nibbled on her neck, causing her to shudder and her arms and legs to go limp. "Francisco." She spoke with difficulty. She couldn't command her body, and a strange tingling thrill ran through her body. Why do you want to get engaged to him? Francisco stopped and buried his head into her shoulder as he tightened his arms. He's a liar. Naomi was stunned. The relationship and engagement between her and Jackie were fake, so she didn't really care if he was lying to her or not. After a long while, she asked, You don't want me to get engaged? Francisco cupped his hands on her cheeks and pressed his forehead against hers. If I say yes, will you cancel the engagement? Naomi lowered her head as she felt a bolt of heat rush up to her face. No, Naomi. You mustn't forgive him so easily. At that moment, a voice rang out in her mind, and she chided herself inwardly. She turned her head sideways and said, No. I'm not going to cancel the engagement. You broke my heart, so I'm going to make your life terrible as well. Besides, we've already broken up. I can be engaged with any man that I want. Francisco pressed his lips against hers. He carried her to the bed, and the rose petals beneath her were messed up. She was startled as she looked at Francisco, who was on top of her right now. He grabbed her hand and put it on his chest. Then you did it. He kissed her fingertip and continued. Naomi, I'm having a terrible time right now. I don't want you to be with another man, and I don't want another man to have you. Naomi's heart pounded upon seeing the affection in his eyes, and her eyes turned red around the rims. Then, why did you break up with me? Francisco kissed her forehead and said, I was just lying. I didn't want to break up with you. Naomi stretched her arms and wrapped them around him. She buried herself into the side of his face and sobbed. Francisco turned around and laid her down on her side. He grabbed her into his arms and pressed his lips to the top of her head. Why are you crying? He asked. I thought you wouldn't care, and I was so scared that you wouldn't come. She sobbed. She was afraid that he would say, I wish you happiness, when he learned that she was engaged. Therefore, she decided to take the bet this time. She was afraid of losing, but she seemed to have won the bet this time. Francisco wiped the tear off the corner of her eyes. He found that she really liked to cry. She would cry when she was sad or when she was touched. He did not like women crying since it was annoying, but whenever he saw her crying, he felt as if someone was stabbing his heart with a knife. He gently kissed the tip of her nose and then the corners of her lips. She looked at him through her tears, and he lowered his head to meet her gaze. In the end, he kissed her lips. In the spacious restaurant, Jackie sat alone on his seat and gently swirled the wine glass in his hand, his eyes gazing out into the distance, through the window. Chapter 1260. I guess my job is done here. Jackie placed the glass in front of his lips and took a sip from the wine. Looking at the empty glass, he couldn't help himself and chuckled. It seemed to him that he had become the Cupid. Why had he agreed to such a boring thing at that time? It didn't seem like his style to pair up a couple. Suddenly, his phone on the table rang. He took a look at the incoming call and frowned before answering it. Grandpa. Thomas's voice blurted out through the other side of the line. You brat, I'll give you 2 days to return. Jackie placed his hand on his forehead. It seemed to him that his grandfather had learned about the fake engagement. Naomi woke up from Francisco's arms. She felt like she was dreaming when she looked at the face that was right beside her. Slowly, ever slowly, she approached him and planted a kiss on his lips lightly. Suddenly, Francisco stretched his arm and pulled her into his embrace, stunning her. She was caught red-handed kissing him, and her face turned red like a cooked shrimp. When did you wake up? A long time ago. Francisco propped his head up with one hand and lay on his side. There was a smile in his eyes as he continued. I wanted to see what you would do to me. She buried herself into the coverlet. Francisco laughed and pulled her out. Do you want to suffocate yourself? The opening of his collar was right in front of Naomi, and she did not know where she should look. Seeing how nervous she was, Francisco pulled her into his arms and said, How can you get nervous so easily? I haven't done anything yet. Naomi felt her head burning as she mumbled, "You've kissed me, hugged me, and touched me. How can you say you haven't done anything yet?" He coiled her hair around his finger and continued. "I just want you to get used to it. After all, we're going to do something even more intimate in the future." Something even more intimate? Is he talking about that thing? When the thought surfaced in her head, her face turned burning hot, like a pot of boiling water. But it's normal for a couple to do something like that, right? Naomi had mentally prepared for it, but it seemed to her that Francisco was not. Francisco seemed to be able to read her mind when he saw the disappointment in her eyes. He leaned closer and kissed her cheek. "I don't want you to think I'm only with you to do that kind of thing." Naomi was stunned. He stroked the corner of her lips with his finger and added, "I'll only do that with you on our wedding night." Naomi was stunned for a moment before she came around to her senses. She sat upright and asked, "What did you say? Wedding night? Could it be that he?" Francisco looked at her and asked, "Will you marry me?" Naomi closed her mouth with her hands in shock. "He wants to marry me." He grabbed her hand and kissed its back. "We can get married any time. You just need to nod." She nodded. Francisco grabbed her into his arms, laughing as he tousled her hair. "Then what about the engagement between you and Jackie?" "It's fake," she said. Francisco was stunned. Naomi lowered her head in embarrassment and said, "We're not seeing each other, and our engagement is fake." When Francisco did not say anything in return, she said nervously, You're not angry with me, are you?" Francisco took a deep breath. "Both of you set me up." Naomi put her fingers together and said triumphantly, "We just wanted to give you a little push." He tightened his arms and put her in front of him. "How could you set me up?" "I'm going to punish you," he said as he started tickling her, causing Naomi to laugh and try to run away. 3 days later, at the Topaz mansion, Anthony sat on the couch silently with a complicated expression on his face. Naomi was sitting opposite him as she said carefully, "I'm sorry, Dad. I shouldn't have lied to you." He took a deep breath and said, "Actually, I already knew about it." Naomi froze for a few seconds. "You knew about it?"